of 10 years and wrote the Amazon best-selling book, The Feminist Lie. It Was Never About Equality. Welcome to Honeybadger Radio's Fireside Chat with our very special guest, Bob Lewis. Hello, Bob. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you for having me on.
All right. Well, it's good to have you on. It's actually kind of interesting. I think you and I we were Facebook friends for a while, and you also frequented our Honeybadger Radio Facebook page, and then you put out this ad. Well, not really an ad, but you were letting people know about your book, The Feminist Lie.
Correct.
And I thought, that's a super interesting book. I noticed that a lot of people are writing about this stuff now, so I had to get you on to find out a little bit more about it. So, I guess my first question is, this is your first book, right?
Correct.
Now, why did you decide to make a book about this topic?
I noticed that while there were a lot of books about feminism, both positive and negative, it didn't seem like there had been a book out there written for the average person. So what I mean by that is that, there's a lot of very well-educated and experienced scholars out there. There's doctors, there's lawyers or psychologists that are all writing some of these books, but they write them in such a way that they're a very difficult subject to approach for the average person. So, the blue-collar worker who's going to and from work every day is not going to want to read, pardon me, a 400-page book. He's just never going to get through it because he's too tired, or maybe he just doesn't have the level of education that particular book is written at. It's not always an approachable subject or an easily approachable subject in that person's life because of time management issues as well as educational issues. So when I wrote my book, I wrote it to, number one, I wanted to talk about things that very few people were talking about. Number two, I wanted to talk about aspects that almost no one has talked about. And I wanted to do it in a way that my book could be used by the average person to debate other people about the bigotry of feminism.
Yeah. So what were some of the things, because this is actually the thing that I'm most interested in, what were some of the things that you wanted to talk about that people were either not talking about enough or weren't talking about at all?
There is a plethora of people out there, YouTube content creators, and everybody online, right? There's a big push against the whole social justice movement, and what a lot of people don't realize is that the social justice movement was actually created by intersectional feminists. So, and intersectional feminism was coined in 1989. And what a lot of people don't understand is that the social justice movement, the politically correct movement, those were movements that were spawned from the feminist movement, specifically, in the 80s and the 90s, second wave feminists and newly branded third wave feminists created these issues. Now, when it comes to those types of things, nobody was talking about that relationship. So you'll have like conservatives that are like, we need to fight back against the social justice movement. Okay, well, in order to, it's like anything else. Like if you're a doctor, right? You have to deal with the symptoms, but you also have to deal with the problem, because if you don't solve the problem. So the example I always use is, a man is walking down a sidewalk. He steps off the curb and he breaks his leg. The bone is sticking out of the leg and he's bleeding. Well, if you don't stop the bleeding, the man's going to die, right? So he needs medical attention. So you have to address the symptom, because the symptom is dangerous. But at the same token, if you don't properly set the bone, it's going to lead to a lot of long-term issues, including re-breaking the leg, that will eventually lead to that person's death. Well, the same issue is this example is relevant to the relationship between the social justice movement and the feminist movement. And what a lot of people don't realize, and I talk about this when I talk about Antifa, is that the tactics that Antifa uses are the same tactics that first wave feminism has used. So there would be a woman who is the leader, surrounded by a bunch of male feminists or / social justice warriors. The female will start the issue. She'll be the one who instigates the confrontation. The second that someone actually responds to that particular feminist, that's when all the male feminists go up and launch their attack, because now at that point they're justified in, you know, tipping their fedoras and defending her honor. So this is a common tactic. You see this with BAM, by any means necessary. You see this with Antifa, and feminists did this in the first wave as well. A lot of these things, now I don't address the Antifa issue directly in my book, but I do address the way the first wave feminists acted, and what their goals and what that was about. These things aren't discussed. The other issue that isn't discussed, and it's never really discussed in kind of the common marketplace of ideas.
Just a moment, real quick. I just want to clarify. When you say first wave feminism, you're talking about the suffragette movement, right?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm absolutely talking about the suffragette movement.
Yeah. And they use a lot of white knights back then too?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. In fact, the suffragette movement, when you look back at the suffragette movement and you look at that, they were sponsored by the same type of welfare state that sponsors feminism today. For example, you know, Margaret Sanger, prominent eugenist, founder of Planned Parenthood, prominent feminist, she was completely bankrolled by rich men. And so, I mean, she had a lot of influence, but again, it's because she had all that corporate welfare thrown at her. So she was able to have a platform she would never have gotten had she had to rely on her own efforts. So as an example.
Okay, so just to clarify, so you were, I'm sorry, I cut you off before. You were saying,
no, you're good.
The other thing, you were getting to another point?
The other point that I think it's important to talk about is the misconceptions that and the misinformation that feminism and its scholars have pushed on the Western world in the legal arena. So, you know, feminists lie about false rape statistics. They lie about the domestic violence issues, and they actually created a legal system that its express purpose is to discriminate against men, and specifically in the United States, it's to deny them their constitutional rights.
There you go. So how do they talk about how they plan on going about that? Is there anything laid out?
Yes. So in 1980, there was a woman named Ellen Pence, and I know that some of the other members of the Honeybadger team have talked about this a little bit. Ellen Pence created the Duluth Model, and Ellen Pence was had a BA degree, and she was a feminist activist. And so she and her friends got some corporate and government welfare, and they created this Duluth Model program. And what it was a multi-jurisdictional program, basically to increase the conviction rate of those accused of domestic violence and rape. And they call it the Duluth Model because of where it was created. It was created in the city of Duluth, and it was a multi-jurisdictional program that combined the efforts of the police department, the judicial system, social activism, as well as the legal system as far as like the laws were concerned, to affect this change. And what was interesting is that Ellen Pence put herself and other legally ignorant individuals over the judges, over the prosecutors, over the police officers. So they were these individuals were reporting to these feminist ideologues rather than going off their own legal knowledge. And it created a lot of issues. There was a lot of pushback. Ellen actually published an article about it, which I include parts of in my book, about the original Duluth Model and about the obstacles she faced. And one of them was that the police officers didn't like the way that feminists were enacting this because it was creating ethical issues. So they were like, look, we can't just randomly arrest people. It's a problem, and we don't want to get sued for violating anybody's civil rights. And this was something that also the prosecutor's office complained about as well. The feminist ideologues didn't care. So what they did is they created this system where they created legalized witness tampering. They created a system where they created a separate witch hunting court, similar to the Title IX courts that they have today in the family courts. They denied men their constitutional rights, and then they interfered with the judicial process using feminist activists to do so.
Huh. And what's a legalized witness tampering for people who may not understand that?
So witness tampering is a crime. So if you try to influence a witness to testify for or against something, you're considered to have tampered with that witness. It's considered in most state law or state basically in most state laws, witness tampering is considered a felony. At the federal level, it's considered a federal felony as well. Well, what these feminists were doing is they were creating victim advocates. So as the police were investigating the crime, so let me give you an example. So husband and wife get into an argument. The wife gets upset. The husband walks outside to cool off. He's smoking a cigarette. He turns around. He walks back into the house. She's locked him out. He gets upset because it's his house, and he's like, you shouldn't lock me out. So he breaks the door down. The neighbor sees him break the door down, isn't sure what's going on. She calls the police. Okay, now they're arguing at this point. He's not actually assaulted her. He's just broken the door down of his own house because he thinks that this is disrespectful for what she did. And he wants to go back into his home. He doesn't want to be homeless, right? So the police get called. They show up on the scene. They, under the Duluth model, they have to arrest him, even though no violence has been committed. So he gets arrested, and he goes to jail. Now, in the meantime, the police officers now start to interview witnesses, and they start doing their investigation to determine whether or not a crime has been committed. However, what the Duluth model is allowed is a feminist victim advocate shows up and tells the wife, you need to prosecute. She's basically tampering the witness, and she's trying to badger or bulldog her into filing a domestic violence claim. Well, what the Duluth model did is they allowed that to happen, even though it's witness tampering and it breaks a chain of evidence. But they also changed the law so that even if she refuses to testify, they shift the burden from her to the arresting officer who never witnessed the crime, and they turn him into the witness. So even if she writes a letter and says, no crime was committed, and my husband's a decent guy, we got into an argument, I locked him out, and this is my fault, the prosecutor can choose to ignore that evidence, and they can choose to exclude it, and they can still prosecute the man anyway.
And how do you know how they managed to work that out to where they basically can do this stuff? Yeah,
they changed the laws. So they changed the laws. They changed the laws. They changed the police department policies, and then what they did is they re-educated and indoctrinated the judges. So and she admits this. She freely admits this in her article, and I include this in my book under chapter 6 under the DV stuff. And this actually happened. And I mean, it's completely unconscionable. It's completely unethical, and it violates every legal, ethical, professional standard that exists.
Yeah. And there doesn't appear to be any logic behind it other than, I mean, like, obviously from the feminist perspective there is, but in terms of it getting passed, there's
that was the thing that was most surprising to me.
Yeah.
I thought, and this was my naivete, I thought that maybe the feminists just maybe they faked a study, or, maybe they were, out smoking drugs one night and came up with this idea, or maybe there was some kind of justification for this, right? Mm-hmm. But there wasn't. There was no like when Ellen Pence and her group of feminist ideologues came up with this idea, they didn't base it on any studies. They didn't base it on any facts. They didn't base it on any statistics. What they based the entire Duluth Model intervention program on was the feminist belief that all men are oppressors and all women are victims.
Right.
Now, what makes this even more damning is they had no science to back it. They had no facts to back it. They did it, and everybody just went along with it. And then all of a sudden, the police department started arresting women for domestic violence.
Well, like women who abused men, or lesbian women? Okay.
No. You have to understand the 80s, the whole LBGT culture just really didn't exist. There was a lot of people.
It was all in the closet. Yeah.
It was all in the closet. So I mean, they were arresting wives for assaulting their husbands and women for assaulting their boyfriends. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting about it is that what the victim advocates did then was they would go and tell these women, don't work with the police, don't talk to the police, don't do anything like this, and they would tell the men, don't press charges. And then they would go to the police and say, there's no crime. So they were interfering with the legal process. These are crimes. These are felonies. And they were doing this on an institutional scale. Mm-hmm. And that's what people miss. Now, the other issue that's relevant here that a lot of people haven't talked about, or the conversation has been stifled, is the actual rate of sexual assault in the United States. And I
Okay.
thought that this was something extremely important. Now, the reason I found it extremely important, not only as a legal professional, is that this is the system that also prevented my children who were sexually assaulted by their mother's boyfriend. They prevented that person from getting held criminally accountable.
Mm.
So you have to understand that, like, I'm not just some, like, random, rape apologist that's
No.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The problem with false rape allegations and the problem with lying about it is that actual victims are the ones who suffer. So you victimize real rape victims, you victimize innocent men falsely accused of rape, and you destroy families in the process. And really, feminism since first wave, even before the suffragettes, they've waged open warfare on men, marriage, and family values. I mean, there's no secret here. You can find these quotes everywhere. Now, with that in mind, when I looked into the issues of sexual assault, I started looking into CDC numbers. I started looking at the FBI, Bureau of Justice Statistics, the Department of Justice. I started looking at the most objective measures I could find, right? And what I found is that the big mistake that a lot of people make is that in the United States, we have a legal theory called innocent until proven guilty. And what that theory is, it means that a man is entitled to be presumed innocent until he is criminally found by a jury of his peers to be guilty. Now, this is relevant because the CDC numbers, even the CDC admits or takes the assumption that everyone accused of sexual assault is guilty. I want you to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
So what I found was that if you assume that everyone accused of sexual assault in a criminal setting is guilty, even if you correct for underreporting, which the Bureau of Justice Statistics does, the actual rate of sexual assault in the United States is 1 in 50.
Yeah, well, I mean, that sounds a bit high, but yeah,
it's assuming that everybody accused in a criminal setting is found guilty.
Yeah, okay.
Now, why is this important? It's important because one of the other giant feminist lies is this idea of rape culture. They have this theory that every man is a rapist and you have to indoctrinate men not to rape. When the reality is that men accused of rape, even if they're falsely accused, they're murdered by vigilantes, they're assaulted by vigilantes, they're destroyed socially, and they're destroyed financially.
Oh yeah, their lives are over, and all it takes is an accusation.
Absolutely.
You can look at Brock Turner as an example. Not that he's innocent. Obviously, some shit went down, but Brock Turner is probably going to be looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life.
Well, and I document at least 8 or 9 cases where men who have been confirmed to have been falsely accused, they've been murdered. They have been actually murdered and killed and had their lives destroyed. So this is a very common thing. But here's the thing: people don't want to talk about what is the rate of false accusations. Well, I then went back and I started looking at the studies and the science behind false rape accusations. And the most credible study that I could find was a peer-reviewed study by Dr. Kanan that was published in the early 90s. And Dr. Kanan conducted a 9-year study, and he found that the overall rate, based on his 9-year study that he found, was about 41% on average.
Of false rape accusations.
Correct. So 4 in 10 rape accusations are false.
Holy shit.
Now let me take it a step further. The police department that he used to determine whether or not a rape accusation was false had a 2-step process to determine whether or not a rape accusation was false. Step 1 after investigation is if the officer suspected that the woman was lying, he would offer her a polygraph examination, which she could choose to ignore or take. Now, the second step is that if she took the polygraph examination and she failed it, then they would offer to allow her to sign an affidavit saying that she signed that it was a false accusation. Now, if she was offered the polygraph examination and chose not to take it, they would still make the same offer. Now, if this is the important piece, if the woman chose to accept the second part of the offer, she would sign a signed sworn statement under penalty of perjury that she made a false rape accusation. If she chose not to, it was not considered a false rape accusation for purposes of Dr. Kanan's study. So the woman herself had to admit it. and she had to tell the truth of what really happened. So that's where he got his 41% from. This wasn't, if this information was cherry picked, it was only cherry picked on when it erred on the side of being conservative with the numbers. In some years, they found that in the 9-year period that the false rape rate was as high as 70%. In other years, it dropped to like 30%. So I document all this in my book. I document what the professionals have to say and what the, you know, and kind of what the reality of the situation is on the ground. Now, why is this a concern for me? Well, let's take a look at the news today with the Title IX courts. The Title IX courts are witch hunting courts. They are parallel systems of justice that demonize college students who've been falsely accused of rape and sexual assault.
Right.
Now, it's my view that anytime someone is accused of a crime, there needs to be a criminal investigation by law enforcement. There needs to be an investigation by the prosecutor's office. And if they find probable cause, then that person needs to be charged. They need to be convicted, obviously, and they need to go to jail. And we have a legal system in place to do this. Every Western country that has adopted feminism has a legal system in place to do this. So, but feminists, it wasn't good enough for them. They wanted every man to be considered a rapist. So they started witch hunting people and started creating these parallel systems of justice. Now, why is this a problem? In the family law court, a woman can accuse a man, and this is the same as in the Title IX courts, which have vastly more attention. The Duluth model has allowed, and all this, the Title IX stuff, it all has its basis in the Duluth model. The most insidious piece of the Duluth model was the civil domestic violence restraining order, or the civil order for protection. And what it allowed women to do was to accuse a man in a civil court or in a non-criminal setting of domestic violence or rape or some kind of abuse. The man, because it's a civil setting, the man has no right to remain silent and has to respond to the charge. He has no right to investigate because it's on an accelerated schedule, usually within 14 calendar days. So he's got no ability to investigate to find exonerating evidence. Okay, so he's got no right to remain silent because he has to respond or she'll get it by default. He's got no ability to investigate because it's on an accelerated trial schedule. Yeah. Then on top of that, he doesn't get a jury. It's a feminist judge, and in family law, almost every judge in every family court in the Western world, almost every judge is a feminist. So he has to submit to the judge. He doesn't get his constitutional right to a jury of his peers, and then in addition to that, he gets no constitutional right to an attorney. So the court itself is engineered to deny a man his constitutional due process rights guaranteed by the United States Constitution. Yeah. And then what happens is that if he's found guilty based on what this feminist judge ideologue says, now what ends up happening is he can no longer own guns, he can't have certain jobs, and it's a quasi-criminal proceeding. But even worse, the entire time, the woman who's falsely accused him of this, she's got a victim advocate to help her tamper with the evidence. She's got feminist investigators to help her out. And then if they find him guilty in the witch hunting family court or the witch hunting Title IX court, then they turn around, they file criminal charges, and all the criminal charges do is rubber stamp what the family court did. And now this man's life is over completely. Now they use this almost all the time in the family court to get custody of children. And I know this because I worked as a family court paralegal for over 10 years. Mm-hmm. And all I did were what was considered high conflict cases. So every case I touched had child abuse accusations, had rape accusations, had domestic violence accusations. Oftentimes there was a parallel child protective services investigation. There was often parallel law enforcement investigations. And what happens is that these feminists create these lies and they have a snowball effect. And so not only does the man get emotionally destroyed because he can't imagine how the woman who pledged her life to him is saying this stuff, but then his life is being destroyed and he'll lose his job. You know, I mean, there's a lot of consequences for a man who is victimized like this. And so these are things that were never talked about. Nobody talks about them in any kind of meaningful way when it comes to how this subject is approached to like the common man. And again, I'm not making any kind of disparaging comments toward a lot of the scholars and people like, AVFM and, Dr. Helen Smith, who've wrote fantastic books on this subject. But the problem is that many times the way they write is not approachable to people who don't have a college education. So I wanted to make sure that this was presented with peer-reviewed studies, with facts, and with government statistics so that people could actually see what the real numbers were in a way that a blue-collar high school educated person could understand.
Yeah, so that it's easier to absorb, and because we want to get this out to more people. Plus, I think that there are some things that, but I was talking to you about this before the stream started. There is this pervasive myth that is perpetuated by obviously liberals, but also conservatives too, that. And they make it into a political issue. They turn it into a political football. Is this idea that feminism, as an idea, was a good one up until recently, or is a good one in other parts of the world. And we are trying very hard to fight against that because it does not go away. And I mean, I have as an example, if people watch the skeptic community that make anti-feminist content, they usually say things like, well, this feminism is okay, but this feminism is not okay. And then Milo or other conservatives like him, conservative commentators like Milo Yiannopoulos, will write about feminism in a way that says, oh, in the 60s, that was totally necessary. But now it's not. And we're constantly struggling to be like, guys, no, that's not like. Well, if you justify it at any point in the past without looking at the facts, you are justifying it in the present as well. You're not really fighting it, basically.
And I would agree with that wholeheartedly. And I mean no disrespect to Milo or anybody else, but the reality is that anybody who says this was a useful idiot. And I can understand why people like Milo might actually take this particular viewpoint, though I'm surprised if Milo has taken this viewpoint.
He absolutely has. He's said it multiple times.
That blows me away because I have a lot of respect for Milo. Milo does a lot of background research and he learns his facts. Mm-hmm. And for him to say something so disingenuous, it would surprise me if he was that ignorant. And the reason I bring that up is because feminism in the 60s, it co-opted the civil rights movement. It co-opted the LBGT movement. It co-opted all these other different movements, and it used a communist tactic called entryism, where basically they would join another organization for the express purpose of co-opting it for their purpose. That's why feminism is so powerful today. But here's the thing. This is the reality. The reality is that starting with first wave feminists, and I'm talking even before the suffragettes, first wave feminists always discussed female superiority and always discussed their hatred of men. This was very commonplace. They thought marriage was slavery. They thought family values were horrible. And first, there are many. I even cite sources in my book that actually discusses this. And let me go ahead and provide a little bit of a spoiler alert for people that are sitting on the fence. Patriarchy has always existed. However, feminists, like every other propagandist out there, will try to change the definition of words in an effort to try to justify their position. So what feminists have done is they have changed the term patriarchy to mean something that it never was meant to mean. Mm-hmm. So feminists have defined patriarchy as this oppressive social construct that is
basically men built the world to the benefit of men and at the detriment of women.
Right. And so what they do is they reframe things, because you have to understand that in Old English, when you said man did this and man did that, they weren't discussing men and excluding women. No. They were using the term man to mean mankind. In other words, the human race. Sure. They weren't reframing it as like, men are great and fuck women. That's not what they were saying. And in my research, outside of feminist ideology, I've never been able to find, and I researched my book for 18 months, full time. And I never found a single scholarly source that objectively supported the feminist idea that patriarchy was created or enacted for the express purpose of oppressing women, with the sole exception that you might be able to make an argument for is Sharia law. And that's it. And I'm not trying to be discriminatory towards Muslims or anything, but Sharia law is very objectively discriminatory toward women when it comes to this egalitarian idea that feminists try to portray that that's their goal, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Although, and I mean, we don't have to go down that rabbit hole per se.
I don't plan on it, but yeah.
But we have, I have spoken to Muslim people, specifically Muslim women. I actually did a fireside chat not long ago with a girl from Saudi Arabia, and Sharia law is certainly something that should be addressed, but I think to do it from the feminist perspective is actually going to create more harm than good, ultimately. Because they're not, the thing is that feminism does not do the one thing that is really important when it comes to human rights issues, and that is to look at this. You cannot know what the problems dealing with a culture are if you're not willing to look at all of the variables. And feminism only ever looks at the women variable. It's the only variable it ever looks at. So if they don't look at the problems that that Islam and Sharia law have for men in Islam and under Sharia law, even if they're not the same, even if it's not equal, but the fact is they don't look at all, then they will never address the problems, because what they'll do is they will give women liberation, they will give women freedoms, they will give women entitlements and free shit, and then the men will essentially have to pay some kind of penalty or be punished because of their original sin of being men. It'll basically be the whole thing starting all over again. If you,
right.
I think that it's in. I point that out because I think there is, and this is essentially one of the big things you're saying with your book too. There's a humongous difference between human rights and feminism, because those are not the same.
And let me take it a step further.
Okay.
In chapter 2 of my book, I talk about the history that feminists don't want you to know. There were strong women long before feminism ever existed as a movement or as an organization. Yeah. In fact, the oldest college in North America was a women's only college. It's over 400 years old. It's in existence today as we speak, and it existed before the United States existed in the northeastern United States, or what is now the northeastern United States. There was a woman who I cite in my book who was she was a Catholic nun, and when she was 14 years old, she got her doctorate in law. Yeah, you know, there's all across the continent of Africa, there are well-documented cases of African queens. China has had queens. Obviously, Europe has had many queens,
of course,
and women,
empresses, and all that. Yes,
absolutely. So this idea that until feminism happened, it's a ridiculous lie. And
absolutely. I think in the time of Rome, there was they had their Senate or their Republic, but there were also the women of. They didn't have power on paper, but they had influence over policy and stuff politically.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And now let's fast forward to today. You want to really debunk feminism in the strongest way possible? Look at Hurricane Harvey. If men were so oppressive, if men were so patriarchal and they hated women, why are they risking their lives to save these women's lives? Mm-hmm. Why not just say fuck them and let them drown? But the reality is that feminism has gotten so far. They made the Tropic Thunder mistake. Never go full retard.
Yeah.
And you see this all the time. And so what happens is that you have this feminism and feminists. They're like living on the same planet, but they exist in a separate world. And their indoctrination. If you've ever watched, I'm a big fan of Sargon of Akkad.
Yeah.
And Sargon did when he was investigating By Any Means Necessary, the feminist Antifa movement. Mm-hmm. He actually was he did a 45 or a 50-minute documentary about cult conditioning.
Yeah, I watched it.
And it's a fantastic video, but what's interesting is even though he applies it specifically in the context of like Antifa and kind of those issues, mm-hmm. The reality is that's the type of conditioning feminists use to indoctrinate male feminists and feminist allies. Absolutely. Since the beginning. Yeah. So the problem is if anybody has ever attempted to communicate with an ideologue, you're never going to change their mind. And what's interesting is that while we're talking about this and we can see all this evidence that's out there, there was a Russian defector back in the 80s, Yuri Bezanov, and you can find him. You can find video interviews of him from 1984, I think it is, and he talked about what the KGB's goal was in the United States. And he actually used the term social justice. And he said, basically, the idea was if we can infect the United States with social justice, we can actually indoctrinate an entire generation of people, and they are immune to being deprogrammed. And so you have to just educate the next generation and hope that that is the solution. But it was interesting and it was frightening, because everything that he talked about, you could see in the 80s, you could see today in the social justice movement and the damage it's had on society. Now, the other issue that I wanted to bring to the forefront about my book, and I think this is something else that people don't understand, and I may sound like an ideologue in saying this, but a feminist stated goal from first wave forward is the destruction of marriage, the destruction of the family, and the destruction of family values. These were all perceived as slavery, and there are prominent feminist leaders and scholars, including but not limited to Gloria Steinem, that have said these exact words. So what is the long-term consequence of that? Well, the long-term consequence is that there are more divorces. So now the annual divorce rate in the United States under the at the time I researched and put it in my book was 46%. So every year you roll the dice, and if it's under 46%, congratulations, you're getting a divorce. If it's 47% to 100%, congratulations, you have another year of marriage. Static Brain, after my book was published, Static Brain published some numbers, or I found some numbers, and most marriages don't last beyond 10 years. I think it's, according to Static Brain, 93% of all marriages don't last beyond 10 years. And according to the CDC, most marriages after 5 years, the husband and the wife are separated. It's like 84%. And even worse, paternity fraud in the United States is 30%. And in the UK, it's closer to 50%. Now, why is this relevant? Well, in addition to feminism's attack on marriage and family values, they also created a sexual liberation movement to create this higher level of promiscuity without consequence. That's why the abortion movement was so necessary and so well integrated into the feminist movement. So the goal was, look, if you're a woman, you can have sex with whoever you want. And you see this with the slut walks and things like that. But if you're a guy, you don't have, those sexual opportunities. So, if you're a guy and you go out and sleep with multiple women, you're demonized. But if you're a woman, that's considered empowered. Then what they did is they destroyed all these families. Now, the long-term consequence of this is that children who are raised in fatherless homes, who don't practice family values, traditional family values, they do worse in life. They're more likely to have mental health issues. They're more likely to become criminals. They're more likely to suck off the welfare state. They're more likely to not have a stable job. And even worse, almost every mass shooting since Columbine, each one of those shooters was raised in a broken home. They were either a child of divorce, or they were raised by or single parent. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Now,
which most of the time is a single mom, like 85% of the time or something.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, I'm not. So we're on the same page. I'm not saying that women are evil, and I don't hate women, but women were sold a lie also. Women were taught that men, especially husbands, were disposable.
Absolutely. No, like it's as Thomas Sowell is one of my favorite economists said, if you subsidize bad behavior, you're going to get more bad behavior. So it's not because there's something about women that makes them that way. It's because you give them free stuff for acting in a way that is destructive, and any group of people will continue to act destructive because they're getting something out of it. Right. So you're subsidizing bad behavior. Right.
And here's the long-term consequence. Men don't get support. And here's a social experiment that anybody watching this stream can do. You can do it from any computer that you're at. Here's a social experiment to give you an example of how successful feminism's war on men has been. Go to womenshealth.gov. You'll see a women's health sign sponsored by the federal, or a women's health website sponsored by the federal government. And it talks about the different health issues associated with women. Now, once you're done with that, go to menshealth.gov. That website doesn't exist. Because, fuck men.
Yeah, obviously.
And so the reason I bring that up is because men don't have the same level of support systems that women do. So that's why you see the majority of suicides are men, and the majority of men who actually do commit suicide is as a direct result of being divorce raped in a feminist-controlled family court system. And I include examples of that. I also include studies of that. There's a 150-page report that I cite in my book about male suicide from an organization out of the UK called the Samaritans. And the Samaritans, not only do they do suicide intervention, but they also do research to try to find reasons why suicide is happening on such a large scale. And this report demonstrates that suicide is a gendered issue, but it's an issue feminists ignore. It's the same thing with homelessness. Most men become homeless as a direct result of getting divorce rape or getting falsely accused. So, you know, these are gendered issues that no one is really talking about. So
yeah.
At the end of the day, you have to be able to address these things in a legitimate way. And pardon me, I'm going to actually address somebody in chat. Mallory Reed, it actually says feminist lie, not feminist life. So I think it's the image is cut off a little bit.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah, because of
not a big deal.
Google Hangouts thing, it's just cutting it off a little bit. It's
life happens.
Yeah, feminist lie.
Yeah.
I can display the website for you guys. All it is the Amazon.com, so you can get the paperback. There it goes right there. I actually have a few things I want to sort of bring up that has come up while we've been talking. One is okay. So one of them is we were talking about false rape accusations, and the study that you cited, this like a 9-year study, right? That
Correct.
concluded, according to the study, that it's somewhere in the realm of like 40% of rape accusations tend to be false. Well, I wanted to like ask a little bit, like maybe if there's more information about this, because I wonder, this is the thing I'm asking about. Does that number include not just cases in which women like intentionally falsely accuse someone of rape, but does that also include cases in which a woman is not sure that she was raped or doesn't think that she was raped, but victim advocates have come to her and essentially convinced her that she was raped? Because I think that happens a lot too. And
it's funny you mentioned that, because no, it doesn't. You have to understand that this study was conducted before the whole victim advocate thing. Mm-hmm. So it was a 9-year study, and even though the Duluth model is considered the most commonly used model for domestic violence and rape intervention in the world, this study didn't have those elements there. And you're absolutely correct in bringing those issues up. So if you account for those things, the number is a lot higher. And when you're talking about these women being talked into, regret rape is a thing, that's witness tampering, and it's a crime.
Yeah. So basically, it's 40% of cases where a woman is intentionally lying about being raped, right?
Correct.
And then there's more numbers that we don't actually have that constitute a percentage of women who are convinced that they had been raped, or that they should file for rape, even if that's ambiguous, or if it's a gray area, or if it wasn't a rape at all.
Correct. And even worse, according to the Justice Project and a lot of other organizations out there that like the Innocence Project and things like that, what they found is that oftentimes a woman is actually raped, but she will identify the wrong perpetrator. And so when it comes to the majority of false rape accusations where there's actually a criminal conviction, mm-hmm. what ends up happening is that 35% in the United States, 35% of wrongful convictions were for sex offenses.
Of course.
And that's according to the National Registry of Exonerations. Now, the Innocence Project, it is, let me see here. Innocence Project, it was 77%. Mm-hmm. Now, what makes it even worse is that these men are pressured to give false confessions, and then they end up later being exonerated based on DNA evidence.
Mm. And of course, it doesn't really matter, because even if they are found innocent, usually the social stigma associated with being accused is enough to ruin you. Like, even if you're innocent, like you're just screwed, because now everyone looks at him and it's just the way that people work. They're like, oh, because we live in a rape culture, of course, we're totally okay with rapists. But no, actually, the fact is, if you're accused, you're screwed. People don't want to associate with you. You will be outcast. You're gonna have a hard time finding a job. If you were in college, you're gonna have a hard time getting your education. you're fucked, basically.
You really are. And the reason I bring that up, and obviously these are issues that are important, but nobody's ever done, at least that I know of, nobody's ever done a deep dive like I've done and have cited all the peer-reviewed studies. And the other aspect of this is no one has ever actually looked to see whether or not there's been pushback. So like the Duluth model, one of the most prominent psychologists in the world who specializes in sexual assault has actually went out and debunked the Duluth model. And I include that information in my book as well. Mm-hmm. But I also, to jump another subject here, when I talked about the long-term consequences of feminism, broken homes lead to broken communities, and broken communities lead to ghettos. So, you have a lot of white nationalists out there that are like, oh, well, blacks commit more crimes, so therefore, it's a black issue. The reality is that the black communities actually were targeted by feminism first.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And so the majority of black communities now have single-parent households, and look at the crime rate. It's gone through the roof.
Yeah.
Now, why is this important? Because before second-wave feminism, black communities had a higher rate of intact marriages than white communities did.
They did.
It was over 70%. But feminism
there were more intact families during slavery than there are now.
Right.
Like in terms of percentages, rather. Obviously, the population's changed, but
exactly. And so that's the thing is that so when you look at this pervasive culture of feminist lies, all these people believe it's true, and you even got smart people who are well educated, like Milo Yiannopoulos, who is saying that, assuming that he said that second wave feminism was good. He's misguided, and all these other feminists that are out there, or all these other anti-feminists are out there who believe that second wave feminism wasn't like that, or first wave feminism wasn't like that. Learn your history.
Yeah.
It absolutely was.
It absolutely was. And yes, it's true. I mean, a lot of skeptics, a lot of, even Sargon has actually said things like, well, I think feminism was okay back in the day. But I think that he has to look closer, and I forgive him his transgressions. But
yeah, I don't think that this is malicious at all.
No. I think it's just like, not looking at it. And also, like if you're the kind of person that doesn't really look really closely at it, and you just think back to, how you were taught about this stuff in history class, which of course we could get into the problems within academia, because I think that's probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest source of where all this propaganda is coming from, then people are going to remember the way that they were taught about this history of feminism in a much more positive light than the reality. So they're going to say, well, of course, second wave and the suffragette movement. I mean, they got the vote. Do you remember you must have seen the interview where Karen went on the Young Turks and spoke to Cenk Uygur, and he basically, yelled at her to get her to thank him for feminism so that she could have the vote, even though, she would have probably gotten it anyway, because the feminism wasn't really about the vote. There was a different group of people that were trying to do that, but it's attributed to them.
Well, here's the thing about let's talk about the suffrage movement.
Let's talk about that. Yeah.
So let me explain my view. My view is this: no one should ever have rights without responsibilities. Okay.
Of course.
I don't care who you are. Now, this is why you have workers, people who just go to their job, they clock in, they do their job and go home.
Yeah.
And why you have managers, because managers take more responsibility, so therefore they're compensated in relation to the level of responsibility they take.
But they also risk more.
Exactly. So there's more risk, and again, that's part of that responsibility piece.
Mm-hmm.
So feminists in the suffragette movement, they did not want to go to war.
No. They
did not want to be drafted. And so feminists actually opposed women's suffrage until Congress pulled the conscription requirement from the bill.
Let me ask you this real quick. Did you make a distinction, because Hannah Wallen on our show, she knows a lot about this stuff. There's a distinction that she makes between the suffragists and the suffragettes. Do you actually talk about that in your book at all? Like, because one of these groups was okay. One of these groups, I can't remember which one it is. I'm sorry, but one of these groups was actually looking to get the vote for everybody, and it wasn't a sex issue. It was not about men or women. I think those were the suffragists, and then the suffragettes were basically the first wave feminist terrorists that were firebombing or like setting fires to libraries and public buildings and shit like that. So
right, and it's interesting because even though I don't make that distinction, I do kind of talk about it because there was a movement for, because you even look at like you know, the black vote after slavery was abolished, feminists actually opposed that as well. Susan B. Anthony opposed it. So, you know, and a lot of prominent feminists actually opposed it. They voted against it because they said that they didn't want blacks to have voting before women. But then again, they didn't want to have women to have the right to vote because they didn't want women to get drafted into war. And here's the reality. If first wave feminists were so oppressed, why were they holding conventions in the middle of Washington, D.C., which they were? And I cite that in my book as well. You have to understand that the feminist movement has been dishonest from the get-go. It reminds me of, you ever see that movie Mars Attacks?
Absolutely, I love Mars Attacks. Oh, the Martians all pretend to be friendly every time they have a chance to get, and as soon as the humans let them in, they start killing a bunch of people.
Right. That's the feminist movement.
Yeah.
Yes. That's the easiest analogy for the feminist movement. The feminist movement are like, oh yeah, we're here, everything's fine, we're just here for equality, and then the second you turn your back, the knife goes in.
Don't run. We are your friends.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
You know. And you see this. I mean, I can show you article, and you can go onto Google and look for this. Look for like male feminists who've been destroyed. The second that feminists are done using a male ally, they destroy them. You look at Josh Whedon, you know, prominent male feminist. They got upset at him. He got destroyed. You know, women who cheat on their men are considered empowered by feminists. But if a man does the same thing, he's a piece of garbage. Now, I don't condone infidelity, whether it's male or female, because I actually have ethics. But again, these are not feminist ethics. You look at Jian Ghomeshi. Jian Ghomeshi was best friends, or one of the best friends, of Justin Trudeau in Canada.
Absolutely.
He had one of the most popular TV shows in Canada. And feminists actually conspired to frame him for false rape charges. He lost his job. He had to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in American funds to defend himself. He got the Cosby treatment in the press. And what they found was that these women had sent over 5,000 emails to each other in an effort to conspire to falsely convict him of rape.
Absolutely.
Now, his mistake, he allowed himself to be called a male feminist. He participated in their BDSM communities. He was kind of sexually deviant when it came to all that stuff. And he thought he was doing the right thing, and they destroyed him. He will never have the prominence that he ever had before. And again, you look at Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby was once called America's father.
Yep.
They crucified him. Now, here's the entertaining piece about Bill Cosby, because everybody's like, oh, you know, he raped these women and blah, blah, blah. You know what? Bill Cosby's defense took 6 minutes. This is not hyperbole. This is not an exaggeration. The news reported that when it came time for Cosby to defend himself at that criminal trial, they called one witness. They presented their case from start to finish, including cross-examination, was 6 minutes. They rested their case, and he avoided a conviction. The case against him was so weak that it was an absolute joke. But yet, feminist organizations were paying article writers and were going after him and were witch hunting him throughout the national press.
Because the goal wasn't to get Bill Cosby convicted. The goal was to essentially destroy his reputation, and they did. So at this point, this is the thing this is why the media is my greatest enemy personally. It doesn't even matter that he's innocent and that there was never enough evidence to convict him in the first place, because the court of public opinion is so misinformed, and they're not being told the truth about this, and the media has no intention of telling them, because they've moved on to other stuff like Russia and whatever. And so Bill Cosby's career has officially ended, and that's actually the thing that's the most telling, is that he never got convicted for anything, so it was never about justice for these women. It was never about justice. It was about destroying Bill Cosby, and they did it, so they don't have to pursue anything else now. Right?
Well, but they destroyed him because people respected Bill Cosby. You see, they want to destroy male mentors. They want to destroy male role models. So you see these strong men who live their lives, and I'm not condoning Bill Cosby cheating on his wife. He's admitted that.
But that's a different crime, right?
Right.
That's a different issue.
Yeah, that's a different issue. And his wife chose to forgive him of that because of his success. So that is, they put that to bed a long time ago. But if you take a closer look at that, every one of these women who accused him, she had a publicist, she had an attorney, And almost every one of them had mental health problems. Almost every one of them was a criminal. Let me tell you something. Women who are victims of sexual assault don't hire publicists and don't hire attorneys to sue you for all your money. And I know this as a father of an actual sexual assault victim. The more that this hysteria goes on, the more that it damages legitimate victims of sexual assault. And this idea of rape culture, not only is there no basis to it, but the organization RAINN, which is Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network, they are the largest feminist-run sexual assault organization in the United States. They are the most credible sexual assault organization in the United States. And they wrote to the Department of Justice, and I include this in my book, in 2014. They wrote to the Department of Justice, and they actually debunked
rape culture. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that's something that I often bring up. Do you also mention, by the way, that that we didn't even define rape as something that a man could suffer from until 2013?
No, I don't necessarily. I mean, I go into the men who get raped, and I go into the stats briefly, but I do it as a bullet point type of format because I don't think there's a lot of. It's not necessary to spend a lot of time on it, but I do go into also the recent studies that have shown that when it comes to one-sided domestic violence, women are the perpetrators 70% of the time, and that's from Harvard.
Yeah.
You know, so I do go into that. But the other issue that I go into that a lot of people miss, children who are raised in single-parent households, they often feel abandoned, you know, and they end up basically adopting unhealthy life choices as teens. So, you know, they're more likely to drink, they're more likely to have premarital sex, they're more likely to commit suicide, and they're more likely to self-harm. Now, the reason I bring up that last one is because in the end, I have a chapter 8, where I talk about how women have suffered for the feminist lies. And one of the things that young girls are doing and have done is they're now self-mutilating with dick.
Okay, could you go into that a little bit?
Sure, and this was actually discussed on Oprah as well. So there are professionals out there that have done some research, and what they found is that instead of self-mutilating, like cutting yourself with a knife or eating unhealthy or attempting to poison yourself, what these women are doing is because they are so mentally unstable and distraught because they're raised in a single-parent household, they are actually going out and seeking premarital sex at a very early age as a form of self-mutilation.
Oh yeah, no, I could see that. Well, the thing is too is that biologically, when a girl is growing up in a single-parent household, specifically one without a father present, she actually hits puberty earlier and becomes sexually active earlier because, well, she's like trying to compensate for that missing person in her life. So that means that she's going to become promiscuous sooner, most likely. And then when you also are raised by a woman who herself was likely promiscuous because she fooled around with some guy who wasn't going to stick around and may not have had intentions of doing so, on top of that, that woman is being subsidized by a state and a welfare system that is essentially saying it's okay for you to act however you want because we're going to keep giving you money, then you're going to create more of this sort of codependency thing where women are marrying and also becoming daughters of the state itself, right?
Correct. And it's gotten so bad that, and I include some stats and some citations here as well, it's gotten so bad that most women by the age of 21 have had 9 sexual partners, and 25% of the women studied had more than 10.
And also, but as an aside, as we're talking about this, there's something else I wanted to bring up.
Sure.
Because it's something I thought about, so I don't know if this is something that you have thought about too. I find it really interesting that the timing of the first wave feminists, well, obviously there are precursors to what we call first wave feminism, obviously. But I find it really interesting that the one that sort of like, that people often think of when they think of the first wave, which is basically the suffragette movement, is right around the same time as the Industrial Revolution took off. And I don't think that's an accident, because I noticed that when the Industrial Revolution took off and you had a massive growth in industry, in capitalist gains, everything was changing in terms of how the job market worked, all this innovation was going on, then you also had groups that were rising up that were basically like, responding to it in different ways. So you had venture capitalists, but then you also had growths in socialist movements. And there is a very strong case to be made that feminism itself is a socialist movement at the end of the day. So did you notice that correlation too, or am I way off there?
No, and actually you hit the nail on the head. I mean, basically, feminism is a form of collectivism, and it definitely has its roots in socialism / communism. And you can see this all throughout. And even if you look at Antifa, you know, they've got the hammer and the sickle, and they're you know, most of them are card carrying communists. Yes. So
they're women basically run Antifa, just like women basically run By Any Means Necessary, and women run Black Lives Matter. There's a great video by a guy named Devil's Advocate, which I've been on his stream a couple times.
Okay,
so you know who he is, and But he has a great video, Dion, where he goes into Black Lives Matter's website and into their history. And at the root of Black Lives Matter is a feminist movement, an intersectional feminist movement. So basically, BLM doesn't care about men, and they don't care about black men. But the dead black men that they use to launch Black Lives Matter is convenient for their movement. But they really don't care about these men at the end of the day.
Correct. That is absolutely correct, and you see this because I'll tell you, you know, black men are demonized more than white men are per capita, and this is primarily because, again, like Tommy Sotomayor says, you know, the black community is a canary in the coal mine, and because feminism targeted the black community first, you know, they're suffering the consequences, which are far more extreme than what we're seeing. So yeah, when it comes to feminism and collectivism, you see this completely. When it came to this, and let's go ahead and go back and give another history lesson. So Gloria Steinem, who created the National Organization for Women, and she's a very prominent feminist author. I go into her history as well, and her college, it looks like it may have been financed by the CIA, and she was paid by the CIA to go to European festivals and promote feminism at these festivals. She worked with the CIA for 10 years. And this is what she did. So, pardon me. So, you have to understand that feminism cannot exist without the welfare state. If you look at every prominent feminist, like Gloria Steinem started Miss Magazine, and she started it with money from other people. And I document how you know, feminism and the welfare state go hand in hand. So, feminism cannot survive without the welfare state. And the easiest way to fight feminism is to starve the welfare state to death. Just you know, put it in a bathtub and choke it to death, and there it is. You know, I will say this. I mean, I do believe that you know, I don't think that like this whole you know, this whole idea of unfettered. I mean, I believe in free market capitalism, but I also believe that we need to have like some kind of mutual aid societies where, you know, people who are disabled do get taken care of.
Sure.
You know, but I think that this idea of having a welfare state and having feminists basically go around and discriminate against men legally, economically, and socially, I think is completely wrong. And so one of the reasons that I wrote The Feminist Lie was I wanted to have anti-feminists and feminists, I wanted to provide them an education about issues that most other anti-feminists don't really talk about. But I tried to write the chapters in such a way that if you wanted to talk about the wage gap, you could turn to chapter 4. If you wanted to talk about false rape accusations or the reality of it, you turn to chapter 5. If you're a woman, you want to look at how feminism has lied to you and hurt you, and you want to learn a different perspective there, you could turn to chapter 8. So at the end of the day, I wanted to make sure that this was sort of like a toolbox for people to use to address feminism both in their personal life, but also to take a larger view of it, to look at what the social and societal consequences of long-term feminism has been.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And well, I guess let me ask you something else. This is a bit meta, but so I've been thinking a lot about all that's been going on in our world with, you know, how crazy things have been, speaking of things like Antifa and like, you know, the how politicized and polarized everything has gotten in terms of our discussions online. And there are a lot of people pointing fingers at various groups and various ideologies as like the root of the problem, whether it is communism or whether it's, you know, white nationalism or what, however right or wrong they may be. But they seem to be, there's a lot of this going back and forth. But I think that the issue is something that is bigger than these sort of named buzzword ideologies like feminism and womanism, which is basically the black version that came out in the 60s, or intersectional feminism, well, I actually believe that the relationship between men and women, but outside of labels and names, the way that we get along is at the core of most of our problems. And that addressing that, which is not, it's not a small task. So I know it's one of those things, it's simple, but it's not, you know, it sounds simple, but it's really an undertaking, is actually at the core of what needs to be repaired. And I think it's the damage that's been done between the sexes. I think that's far beyond everything else. I don't know if
I would agree with that, and I've thought about that extensively.
Yeah.
It's my view that feminism has destroyed the social contract between men and women.
Yeah.
And you see this, and I can tell you right now, before second wave feminism, people who disagreed could talk across the aisle. They could find common ground to communicate. They had national pride, which I don't think is a bad thing. And they had, they were able to find common ground and negotiate. That's what our country has been built on. And that's why we were the leader of the free world for so long. And it's why we have one of the longest standing governments. But feminists have turned our country into a shit show. And they do this in every country they take hold. You look at Venezuela with its feminist social justice movement, it's in shambles. You look at Sweden. Sweden has a very public feminist government. It is a shit show. And every country that adopts feminist ideology, the birth rate drops to the gutter, the marriage rate drops to the gutter, crime rate gets increased, and you see all these other issues that arise. Now, not all those issues are in every feminist country. For example, feminism was adopted in Japan. The marriage rate fell, and the birth rate fell. And part of that was because of feminism, but the other part of it was because of the traditional values men were working themselves to death. But you look at Spain, again, marriage rate's in the gutter. Birth rate is in the gutter. Sweden, the birth rate's in the gutter. United States, the birth rate is in the gutter. And now that feminism is infecting South America, you're seeing the birth rates fall there as well. Canada is the same thing. So when you have these issues that come up, and then when you go and you approach feminists about it and you say, hey, we're concerned about this, have you thought about the long-term consequences? You get ideologues like Anita Sarkeesian who call for your censorship. And now all of a sudden she's rebranded herself as an online cyber violence victim. And the crime, someone disagreed with her. So you have to understand that the left and those who support feminism, they are actively avoiding any kind of dialogue, and they avoid it every chance they get. You look at Google, you look at Facebook, you look at Twitter, you look at all these social media platforms, and when feminist bigotry is called out, YouTube is demonetizing videos and closing people's channels for actually discussing facts, verifiable facts and observable reality online. You look again, Facebook has banned Sargon of Akkad. YouTube has started to demonetize.
Did Facebook ban Sargon? Because I know Twitter did, but I didn't know
Facebook did as well. Yeah, Facebook banned him. Twitter banned him twice. YouTube has started to demonetize his videos, and some prominent feminists got the financial backing to sue him. So you have to understand this is full spectrum warfare, and when it comes to debate, feminists have one tactic. It's a dishonest, scorched earth policy to silence dissent. That's the only thing that they have. That's the only tool they have in their toolbox. And what's interesting is that if you look at the white nationalists and you look at even the racists, even the card-carrying racists, they actually want to have dialogue. They actually want to have this communication. Let me ask you a question, and this is kind of a rhetorical question. When was the last time you saw a racist organization have a public rally where they actually instigated the violence? Like a public demonstration where they've actually instigated the violence.
Well, I mean, I would include Antifa in that. So
I'm talking about.
But if you're talking about white nationalists and the KKK and shit, no. I mean, I actually probably not in a long time because the FBI is like all up at their ass. But no, not in a while because they generally it wouldn't serve them very well to do it. I don't think it would be a good idea. So I mean.
Well, right, and so they understand that they can't resort to violence, so they're trying to create rhetoric and dialogue. Now, I don't support them, but I'm just saying that if the goal of the social justice of the feminist movement was equality and it was diversity, then they would allow diversity philosophy. They would allow diversity of political opinions. They would allow diversity of conversation, diversity of thought. They don't want any of that.
Yeah.
And so the challenge you have is you have people who want to be able to express themselves through legitimate and sincere dialogue, and then you have people who want to silence it. And that is the overall challenge. So when you kind of take like this meta look at what the conversation is and who is at fault, ask yourself who doesn't want to talk. Who is unwilling to come to the table and have honest, sincere, and peaceful dialogue,
or who's trying to silence other people,
right?
Yeah.
So you can take a look at that, and you can even see how feminism has responded to anybody who's attempted to do that. Look at Lacey Green; she was demonized for it. They witch hunted her for it.
Mm-hmm.
And and don't get me wrong, I don't have a lot of respect for Lacey Green because she spread so much misinformation about feminism.
She was part of the problem.
She was part of the problem.
Yeah, so I mean,
she's never.
I feel
she's never walked back any. Yeah, she's never walked back any of her statements.
No,
but I don't believe that she's. I don't believe that she's as bigoted as some of the others, because I think she's more of a professional feminist rather than an actual like a ideological true believer.
Yeah. I could see that, but I agree with what you're saying about her not walking back her statements, and it actually upsets me that people, again, a lot of people in the skeptic community give her a pass because she's being nice and she's dating Chris Reagan, and somehow this makes all of her like shit that she said in the past like okay, and I'm like, yeah, but she still accused half of the population of the United States of America of being rape apologists and hasn't walked that back. She still, she claims she saw like the red pill, and she was being interviewed by Dave Rubin, and he said, so how much of that, was there anything in that movie that surprised you? And she was like, no. And I was like, so wait, hold on a second. So you're saying nothing in that movie surprised you, yet you actually did absolutely nothing throughout your entire career to help MRAs get their voices heard or get a platform. You didn't do anything to help them, but you don't disagree with anything, and you didn't find anything in the movie surprising. So there's stuff there that I think, I mean, I'm not trying to make this about Lacey, but I just had to say that because it bugs me, because there's this, it goes back to this core feminist lie that we are giving people a pass on stuff, or we're giving an ideology and a pass on stuff, because there are too many people that think that it's just, there's just fringe elements that need to be essentially whipped into shape. And it's like, no, this isn't fringe shit.
Let's address that. And I think that's so one of the main, you asked earlier in the interview, one of the main reasons why I wrote the book.
Yeah.
Let me give your audience a dose of reality. You could speak the truth to feminists on social media, out in the public square, anywhere you want, and shame them and get a lot of public support for it. But until state legislatures and federal legislatures and legislative bodies in other parts of the Western world start repealing the bigoted feminist laws that discriminate against men and that harm society, you're making no gains in addressing the feminist bigotry that exists. And the reality is that the MRA movement, by all objective measurements, sadly has failed. And not only are they not making any gains when it comes to the legal arenas, but the laws are getting worse. I mean, look, in California, if your condom falls off or your condom breaks, you could be accused of sexual assault. It's called stealthing. Yeah. So if you're a guy, I've used a condom before. Let me tell you something. Condoms break. Condoms fall off. They're not all that, but that's considered sexual assault in California. Sweden's feminist government actually considers unprotected sex, even if it's consensual, they consider it rape. That's why Julian Assange was demonized so long. Julian Assange wasn't demonized by governments because of what he was saying per se. Julian Assange was targeted by feminists. That's what people don't understand. It was the feminist laws that caused him to be in that Ecuadorian embassy for so long.
But wait, what do they do? How in what way did feminists go after Julian Assange? That's interesting.
So Julian Assange actually had unprotected sex with two women, and in Sweden. And so what ended up happening is that
the same time
some feminists found it. Well, probably. He was very sexually promiscuous. Probably
must be nice.
So, it's rough. but the point is that he had sex with 2 different women at 2 different times, and he didn't have protected sex. So even though the sex was consensual, it was consensual 100% of the time. Some feminists got their asses in a bunch. One of them got these women to go to the police and file a report. When the police investigated, one of the women was like, "No, this is bullshit. It was consensual. Yeah, he had unprotected sex, but it wasn't a big deal. Neither one of them was pregnant. Neither one of them had a kid." The other woman kind of complained a little bit about it. The first prosecutor investigated it and dropped the case because he realized it was bullshit. The second prosecutor took the case, realized it was bullshit, and dropped the case. Finally, they cherry-picked and they searched all over the country to find a feminist prosecutor that wanted to prosecute him. Then they went to go prosecute him. They still didn't prosecute him. They just wanted to talk to him for questioning. Now, you have to understand, Julian Assange, when he was first accused, he went to the police station for questioning. He talked to the cops. They investigated. He did interviews. He didn't run away. And then when this third prosecutor went after him, he was like, I got to get out of here. This is bullshit. So that's when he left, and they put out a warrant for his arrest, and he hadn't even had any criminal charges against him. To this day, he's never had criminal charges placed against him for the sexual assault. But he's had to stick in this Ecuadorian embassy because of these bigoted feminist laws that Sweden has that demonizes men who have unprotected sex. So that's just one example that people, it's right in front of your face. It is the elephant in the room, and no one wants to address it.
That is crazy. It's crazy it's crazy that that's like how Julian Assange ended up in the position he is due to feminism. It's still, that's pretty crazy. I'm just saying that's how much reach they have, Yes. And that's wow.
Yes. And then you take another, you look at manspreading, okay? Men have balls. I'm sorry. It is a thing. So you have to spread your legs a little bit.
Some of us only have one.
Fair enough. Well, you guys are the lucky one. No, I'm just playing. But you know what I'm saying? Men have testicles, right?
Yeah.
So, but in California, they've made manspreading a crime. New York has arrested people for manspreading. Mm-hmm. Spain has actually criminalized manspreading. So you have to understand that, the laws are getting progressively worse. After Gian Ghomeshi was found innocent, and his rape accusers were considered, they were outed for being the liars that they were, Canada changed its laws so that people like Gian Ghomeshi couldn't defend themselves. Now you're having this listen and believe movement. In the UK, they're talking about having women who testify. They want to prevent men. They want to prevent men who've been accused from confronting their accusers in court. So what they're doing is they're allowing women to testify by videotaping, by having professionals videotape her testimony.
Yeah. And
then they submit the videotape as her testimony. It's completely disingenuous. So you have to understand, the laws are not getting better. They are getting progressively worse. Yeah. And the thing that my book talks about is that until these laws get repealed, until this feminist influence and this gynocentric influence gets addressed in the government, MRAs, anti-feminists will never make any legitimate headway. Yeah. And that's the brutal truth.
Well, so you're saying we need a top-down... Well, we need to basically get the government to change some things, because a lot of the problems we're facing are coming from the state. So that means we need top-down solutions, or at least in these examples.
I don't know. Honestly, I'm not convinced. Obviously, I believe in a free market, and I believe in democratic values.
Oh, of course.
Yeah. I think that when you're talking about top-down solutions, we definitely need people who can bring the truth to these to these legislatures.
Yeah, and
the problem though is
the problem with that is, this is the biggest problem, I think. The only way we can get significant changes is if we elect in people who have our best interests in mind, and the majority of politicians, the kinds of people who could enact such legislation, only have an interest in getting elected. And the way that they get elected is by appealing to women. That's actually the best way to appeal to get elected, because women make up the majority of voters, and women tend to vote in their own self-interest more than men.
Well, yeah, you can't compete with free.
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
But here's the thing. You have to understand that feminism, and I talk about this at the end of my book, people who oppose feminism, you are not the opposition. We are not the opposition. Mm-hmm. We're the resistance. Feminism already won. Yeah, it won, and feminists know they won. And so they are afraid that people like you and I are going to have these conversations. They're afraid that the people listening to the live stream now are going to hear these wrong things, you know? And so that's why you see feminist organizations that are government funded, like Google and Facebook and Twitter. These people are in bed with the welfare state. And so they're deplatforming our views and our perspectives because they don't want this conversation to reach the light of day. Now, I'm fortunate, and I'm actually really surprised, and I'm very humbled, because when my book came out, I'm a nobody. I'm just like a guy, right? I worked in the family law system. I don't have a big political reach. I don't have, you know, a lot of the resources that somebody like Milo has. But my book, when it first came out, within 12 hours of release, it was a bestseller on Amazon, and it remained on the bestseller list for 2 weeks. Today, it's in the top 10 in at least 2 different categories. It's in the top 20 and a couple others, and it's in the top 100 and even more. So people are actually, and I'm not the best writer, but I haven't had a single critic, positive or negative, ever challenge any of my sources because they are all legitimate. I went out of my way to make sure that my sources were not anti-feminist sources, and they were not feminist sources, with the exception of people who I believe are credible, like Christina Hoff Sommers, who's done fantastic work in debunking a lot of feminist lies that are out there, and other people like her. And I've had over 60 positive reviews. Amazon rates it at a 4.5. The book's only been out for 3 months, and it's been an overnight hit. Mm-hmm. And I'm just completely humbled by it. So people are paying attention, and they're reading it, they're giving feedback, and it has been it's taken off far more. It's been far more successful than I thought I was. I thought I was just going to be, because I'm a grandfather, so I thought I was going to be like, you know, some old guy, you know, basically telling people to get off my digital porch.
Yeah, sure.
Type of thing.
Sure. Well, yeah, I'm really glad you wrote this book. There was one other thing I wanted to ask you about. We've gone for about 3 hours or an hour and 20 minutes, but I want to know a bit about, because, okay, so Bob Lewis is not actually your name. So I want to know a bit about the story behind that, and I guess it has something to do with some way you were treated by feminists.
So I used to work in the family law industry, and I was very successful in defending men from feminist bigotry. I came up with a lot of, and as a paralegal, you can't be an attorney, so you can't necessarily represent in court, but I can do the legal research, I can write the legal pleadings, I can write the memos to the attorney and help inform his arguments. I can do the investigation. I can interview witnesses. And in an administrative setting, I could and did often would negotiate on behalf of the law firms I contracted to. And so I was very effective in helping these men get through these issues. And what I found is that once you build a reputation, feminists will target you and they will witch hunt you. And so eventually, after a little over 10 years, I realized that even though individual successes were high, the system was getting progressively worse. Family law was completely saturated by feminists in every element of it. And so between feminists and their white knights, on a systemic level, nothing was improving. And I was like, you know what? I can't be a part of this anymore. I need to back out. I need to go do something else. So when I wrote the book, it was interesting because I did use a pseudonym. And I did that specifically because of my experience in the family court. Now, I belong to some Facebook groups, and one of the Facebook groups I belonged to was a writing group. And I published a book. I said, hey, look, you know, my book's a bestseller. I'm excited. I'm self-published. And even though I'm not the best, the best writer, my book is resonating, and you can do this too. You know, don't give up your writing goals. You know, I'm a first-time author. Go ahead and do it for yourself and see what happens. I had feminists. My book turned on this writers group. My book turned into a shitstorm. There were over 100 negative comments, this and that, and then I started getting people contacting me, telling me how horrible I was. I started getting harassed. I had a prominent feminist who, she actually had a follower base on Facebook of about 8,000 followers. She posted a link in my book. She called for fake reviews. When my book was #1 in the civil rights section, I had a true crime author who was a very well-known true crime author. I had her contact Amazon and have her book recategorized to knock my book off of the #1 slot. It dropped to #2. So it was like a full spectrum attempt for feminists to harass me. Now, what was interesting is that Amazon actually, when my book got published, somehow in their algorithm, they actually connected me to a IT author with the same name. His name is Bob Lewis. And so he's an older white guy who writes IT books. He's been around Amazon for a bit. He's written a bunch of books on
yeah.
Basic
When I looked your name up, I got that guy. I was like,
right.
Wow, this guy's written a lot of books. I'm gonna get like a real fucking Charles Dickens on here or something. But yeah, it turned out that no.
No. What ended up happening is that feminists saw him, and they went after me. They thought I was him, and because of Amazon's mistake. Mm-hmm. And I'm actually not white. I am. My father was English and Dutch, and my mom was a Latina. So I'm as brown as they come.
Okay. Welcome to the club.
There you go. So yeah, I'm actually about as brown as you are. So so I'm looking at this, and what's funny is that they started making racist comments against white people. So this guy wrote, and I put it on my blog at misandry-today.com. This guy writes, not only white, but a shifty, balding white rat hiding behind cover. And all these people just started harassing me on Twitter because they thought they outed me. They thought they doxed me. They thought they harassed me. So I wrote, when I realized that this guy was when I realized that this guy might possibly get witch hunted because of something I wrote, I actually contacted Amazon. I'm like, you need to take this guy off my book. I don't want some innocent guy getting harassed for my viewpoints. And so then I wrote a blog piece. I copied and pasted some of because when I told these feminists about this, they started deleting their Twitter posts, the more harassing ones. So I saw those. I copy pasted the ones I could grab, and I posted them on the Amazon or I posted them on the blog article. Then I shared the blog article with these feminists, and I said, "Good job, you witch hunted the wrong guy. You guys are bigots." Yeah. And I just confronted them. I basically told them the truth, and they basically, like cockroaches, when you turn on the light, they scattered away. But the problem is that you see this all the time. I'm not the only one to get witch hunted. I'm thankful that feminists saw that discretion was a better part of valor, and they backed off. But honestly, I think the only reason they've backed off is because they attempted to dox me. It didn't work, and now they're just furious because they don't know who to fight. So as long as I am somewhat anonymous, they basically have no legitimate target to go after. But they did attempt to do so wholesale. I mean, they went after me on Facebook. They went after me on Twitter. And they were even calling, like I said, they were calling for fake reviews. In fact, what's interesting is when my book first came out and it hit the bestseller list, a feminist wrote a fake review. And apparently some of the people who read my book, they saw the fake review. Yeah. And I found out later they reported it to Amazon, and Amazon actually took the fake review down. So, and again, you can see a lot of this stuff for what it is, but yeah, I mean, I have been targeted by feminists, and thankfully not at the level that some other people have had. But again, it's because I think I've taken steps to, protect my identity and to make sure that, they're basically shooting at smoke.
Yeah. Well, still, that's crazy. I'm glad that the real Bob Lewis didn't. He didn't, his career didn't suffer too much, because these people can be rabid, absolutely rabid when they go after somebody.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't know if I want to really quickly go through the synopsis of your book for the people who are going to go look at it. I would definitely check it out. I've already ordered one. I've been getting a lot of other people's books that have been, being made. Like I have Ayaan Hirsi Ali's book, I got Milo's book, I got Lauren Southern's pamphlet. I'm going to be ordering your book, as well as the Men on Strike book by I forget her name. Did you notice that you were actually lumped in with them, by the way?
Yes.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. I actually when Milo's book came out, his book was _1 in a category, mine was #3. So I took a screenshot to show that our books were kind of, people were paying attention to those. Yeah. And Dr. Helen Smith, who authored Men on Strike, yes, she wrote a nice short piece, a nice positive piece about my book on her blog, MPJ Media. So nice. I mean, people have paid attention to it. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of nice to see, people who see having the book, in the wild and appreciating it for what it is. You know, so like I said, there are some grammatical errors in the book, but you know that's what happens when you're self-published. So
yeah, exactly. But yeah, Feminist Lie, recommended with Men on Strike by Helen Smith. That's a really good book if you guys can get your hands on it, and the Red Pill documentary. So at least more people are you know, like I said, talking about this stuff, as well as The War Against Boys and The Rational Male, Positive Masculinity. So there's some other books out there. Definitely check out The Feminist Lie. It was never about equality. Yeah, maybe a lot of this stuff is stuff that you guys know because you watch us, because you watch Karen Strawn. You know, Girl Writes What does a lot of work in this area. But, you know, wouldn't it be nice to have something that you could quickly pull out when you have friends over, or you're at, like, your next family Thanksgiving and you want to make things really awkward and be like, hey, you guys want to hear about how feminism is cancer? Because that's what I'm going to do this year. No, I don't know if I'm going to do that. But
well, here's the thing. I mean, the thing about my book is like when I got done writing the first draft, it was over 300 pages long. I cut over 100 pages out of it so that people could use it. It basically, The Feminist Lie is small enough you can put it in your back pocket. It's a toolbox anytime you want to discuss feminist bigotry. You can turn to the chapter that's there. It's basically meant to be kind of like a toolbox / irreverent textbook, so that people can actually not only learn about the issues, discuss the issues, but can defend the issues.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think that is really useful. And a nice, like, you know, pretty easy to consume reference book. I mean, would you say this would be, like, good to have on your coffee table?
Absolutely. It's a, you know, all the studies I cite in my book are peer-reviewed. I identify the studies and the authors so that people know exactly who I'm talking about to fact-check my work. When I don't cite those, I study journalistic sources and use basically investigative journalism, and I cite other professionals who've done a lot of work on the subject. So it's jam-packed with peer-reviewed studies, investigative journalism, and solid, verifiable facts from very objective sources. It's not cherry-picked information.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely a coffee table book. It's definitely a book for people to kind of check out. And really have as a toolbox. And you know, anybody over 16, I suggest reading it as well because it's very easy to consume. And if you're an avid reader, it's probably something you can get through in about a day and a half.
Yeah. All right, there you go. All right. Well, I want to thank you for that. Is there anything that you wanted to ask us before I wrap the show up, or say maybe there's something I didn't ask you that you think you should say?
I think we pretty much covered, I mean, the majority of issues associated, or I should say subjects associated with The Feminist Lie.
Yeah.
I wanted to thank you for having me on, and for those that are kind of watching the stream who are paying attention. If you do read the book and you do like it, please definitely read a review. Or I'm sorry, definitely write a review on Amazon. For those people, it's available in Kindle, and it's also available in paperback. I'm working on an audiobook for it right now. That's in process. And in addition to that, it's available in Apple Books. It's available at Barnes & Noble. It's available in Scribd, in addition to Smashwords.com. So it's not just available on Amazon, but because they are the largest book retailer, that's the primary focus, but it is available pretty much everywhere in the Western world where ebooks are sold.
All right. Oh, and there is something that I just realized that I do remember. So this is your first book, and it seems like it's a pretty decent success. Do you have plans on writing another one?
I actually do. I've got 6 other books outlined, and I've started my second book on divorce rape culture, where I talk about how it is acceptable for basically men to get divorce raped. And we're going to be written in a very similar fashion in that it's a handbook for men to use to avoid both divorce rapes, false accusations, and harassment, and basically nuts and bolts information on how to navigate through the family court.
Okay, and when you say divorce, you said divorce rape? So basically like getting divorced and then losing all your shit?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, so basically it's about the family court system. Good. Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. So we'll be on the lookout for that. I assume that still has a way to go because this one just came out. So
correct.
And yeah, so guys, in case you forget, it's called The Feminist Lie. It Was Never About Equality by Bob Lewis. Get it on Amazon and all the other places that he had previously outlined. I want to thank you, Bob, for coming on, and I want to thank you guys for tuning in and watching us on this live stream. We are on live on multiple platforms: 2 YouTube channels, Facebook, Twitch, Livestream, Ustream, Periscope, and a couple of other ones that I don't remember. But please leave a comment. I really like seeing you guys on here talking about this stuff. I think these are important conversations, and I'm really glad that we're still having them, especially because it's the main reason why I wanted to get Bob on to talk about his book is there is this, for some reason, unkillable, pervasive idea that feminism cannot be criticized as a whole, and it has to be criticized in pieces or in different areas of time or in different parts of the world, whereas I think that anybody who's really doing their homework and really looks at this very closely can determine that feminism was never necessary and that we can do without it completely. So if there's anything else you want to add, otherwise I'm just gonna take us out.
I think we're good. Thank you again for having me on, and for anybody that watched and who will watch this stream. Thank you for watching, and any feedback is good feedback. So thank you.
Thank you. You guys have a good one. We'll see you on the